Welcome to European Journeys. This is the 10th stage of a series that takes us to Sweden, where we explore the early phases of the Christianization of the country. For our last stage, we were visiting the city of Sigtuna, and this is where we are going to return for this stage. In fact, as you look at the map of Sweden right now, you see Stockholm County, and we're going to zoom in, and you see there the big lake, that is Lake Mälaren, and Sigtuna is in fact located on the northern shores of the lake and along one of the arms of the lake. For our last stage, we were visiting the city's museum, and if you haven't followed it, I encourage you to go and look into our archives and watch that stage. And for this stage, we are going to a church that is only 400 meters away from the museum. It is a church made of red bricks, and it has an architectural style which is a mixture of Romanesque and Gothic. Now, the name of the church is Maria Kyrkan, in English Mary's Church, and that obviously points back to the Roman Catholic times. The church was built indeed in the mid 13th century, and it was part, before the Reformation, of a Dominican monastery. Then after the Reformation, the church became a Lutheran church, and it is still like that to this day. Now, as you enter into the church, you discover on one of the side walls a painting which is rather uncommon for both Lutheran and Roman Catholic churches indeed. Because as you look at the painting, you discover a lady wearing a crown, that's nothing so surprising, but holding on her right hand a Orthodox cross, and on her left hand she is holding a cathedral with onion domes, which are very typical in Russia and Ukraine. And in fact, next to the painting you find her name written in Swedish, Heliga Anna of Novgorod, that is Saint Anna of Novgorod. So, why do we find a Russian Orthodox saint on a painting right here in a Lutheran church in Sweden? That's rather uncommon, as I said. Maybe some might think that this is another sign of the rising ecumenism of our time, but there are deeper historical reasons for having this painting right here. Because in fact, Anna is very famous in Russia and Ukraine. It's one of the saints most venerated in the Russian Orthodox Church. And at the same time, she is largely unknown in Sweden. And yet, she is of Swedish origin. She was a Swedish lady who was born in the royal family. She was one of the daughters of the King of Sweden, Olof Köttkonung, about whom we've talked already in several stages before. And at her birth, she was born in the year 1001. Her father didn't give her the name Anna, but Ingegerd, so she was called Ingegerd. And the reason why it is so important to find her here is because she, in fact, grew up in Sigtuna, and most probably she was also born in Sigtuna. So this is why it is important to have her memory celebrated here. Now, if you look out from the church, if you go out from the church, you find that there is just next to it there are ruins of another ancient church, which is named after Saint Olof. Now, don't be misled. This Olof is not the father of Ingegerd, that is Olof Köttkonung, but it is in fact the king of Norway. In Norway is in fact called Olaf, that is Olaf Haraldsson, who became Saint Olaf. So it's called Olaf in Norway, Olof in Sweden. Now, why is it important? What does that have to do with this Ingegerd? Well, Olaf of Norway lived around the same time as Olof Köttkonung, and in fact, he attacked him on Lake Mälaren. He attacked the army of Sweden, the army of the King of Sweden, and he defeated them. Well, that left Olof Köttkonung rather bitter, but at the same time, Olaf Haraldsson, that is the King of Norway, wanted to find unity between the two kingdoms through marriage, and so he wanted to marry, in fact, Ingegerd. So he asked Olof Köttkonung to marry his daughter, and quite understandably, Olaf refused. And instead of that, Olaf gave Ingigerd to a prince of Novgorod, a prince of Russia, and that was Yaroslav the Wise. Now, Yaroslav the Wise was no one else but the son of Prince Vladimir of Kiev, who was in fact the first Christian prince in what is modern-day Ukraine. So this is about the story a bit behind Ingigerd. But why is she so important for the Christianization of Sweden? Well, not only she is important for the Christianization of Sweden, but also for the Christianization of many other countries of Europe, such as Russia, but also others. So we are going to look a little bit more in details into that. Now, firstly, she was baptized as a baby with her father, or as a very young girl, with her father in Husaby. And that was, of course, in those times, baptism was taken, and still it is the case today, by the way, in the Lutheran Church, that babies are baptized. Baptism didn't mean conversion necessarily, but it could also mean the dedication of a baby or the dedication of a whole family. That was the understanding of Olaf Skötkonung, the dedication to God of his own family. So not only he was baptized himself, and we've talked about that in a previous stage, but he also baptized his family, and that is Ingigerd as well. Now, the baptism at the time was not just an act of tradition or nominal act as can be done in our day. There were consequences. That meant that the family, the children, there was a promise by Olaf Skötkonung that he would raise his children in the Christian faith. And Olaf did so. He made sure that his daughter Ingigerd would be raised in the Christian faith. And that we find, of course, in the Bible, Paul writing to the Ephesians that the fathers must bring up their children in the training and instruction of the Lord. Olaf obeyed that commandment, obeyed that order, and Ingigerd was raised in the Christian faith. As a result, she is known to be one of the earliest literate royals of Sweden, and so we can see the process of the rise of literacy in Sweden already beginning with that early queen. And how do we know that? There are in fact letters that have survived in which we can read her lament somehow, her sadness for not being able to marry the king of Norway. So that's quite an interesting and an important step in the Christianization of Sweden, the rise of literacy. Obviously, it starts just with the nobles at that time, but it will eventually spread also to all the layers of society. Now, another point that is very important, and that has an impact outside of Sweden, is that Anna, that lady who became Anna, Ingigerd, was married to Yaroslav the Wise. She it was an arranged marriage by her father, and obviously we can think that that was a sad romance somehow, that she couldn't marry the man she wanted. But this was turned for the good of many nations indeed, because through her marriage, Yaroslav and Ingigerd got 8 children, or maybe even 9. We're not quite sure about the 9th, but at least 8 children. And she did exactly the same as her father did with her. That is, she raised her children in the Christian faith, in the instruction of the Lord. So they received a Christian education, and the Lord made so that 3 of her children would become, in fact, queens of other nations. They would marry kings of other nations, and 3 of them became queens. These were Elisif. She became the queen consort of Norway. Her second daughter, Anastasia, became the queen of Hungary, queen consort of Hungary, that is. And her third born, Anne, became the queen consort of France. So 3 kingdoms were blessed with Christian queens, thanks to the obedience of that lady, Ingigerd, to raise her children in the Christian faith. So Hungary, France, and Norway, in fact, received a Christian queen thanks to that. Now, as a final point, Jaroslav the Wise died before Ingegerd, and so Ingegerd decided to become a nun, and that's when her name was changed into Anna. Now, she vowed this monastic vows, and she went into some sort of seclusion that was quite common at the time. This ascetic ideal sprang more from Greek philosophy than from the Bible, but this was something that was quite common, in fact, at the time. And she is also known to be behind the construction of two of the most important cathedrals of Russia and of Ukraine. One of the most important in Russia and probably the most important in Ukraine. The one in Russia is Saint Sophia of Novgorod, and the one in Ukraine is Saint Sophia of Kiev. Now, Ingegerd, now become Anna, died in Kiev. She did not see the cathedral finished, and she was buried in the cathedral Saint Sophia in Kiev, and she is still buried to this day there. So no wonder that she is so famous in Russia and Ukraine. Sadly, she's not so much known in Sweden, but she ought to be, because she has in fact had a huge influence over not only just the Christianization of Sweden, but over the Christianization of several other nations of Europe as well. I'm Cedric Placentino. See you next week for another stage of European Journeys.